Alright, 3, 2, 1. Not long after the end of the 2023 IndyCar Series season, they released their schedule for the upcoming 2024 season. As for my reactions and opinions to it, I am whelmed. I'm not overwhelmed, and I'm not underwhelmed. I am simply whelmed. There are a few things that I like, and a few things that I thought really needed improvement. So that got me thinking, what would I do differently? A simple idea kinda snowballed into this little mini-series talking about what I would do if I gained control of the series. In this scenario, I, Bobcat205, become Supreme Overlord owner, president, and CEO of IndyCar. I am the one in charge of setting up the schedule, making deals, setting up promotional tactics, negotiating with new engine or chassis suppliers, etc. This is how I would set up the IndyCar series for success in the future, starting with creating a schedule that caters to a wide variety of markets and fan interests. But first, some ground rules. First and foremost, we're trying to keep this as realistic as it is entertaining. So, unfortunately, we can't bring defunct tracks back from the dead like Riverside, Walt Disney World, Trenton, or Nazareth. Although we will bring up Nazareth later, trust me. These tracks must also be safe and normal enough for Indy to run on. Tracks that are off the list for this reason are Daytona, Talladega, Atlanta, Los Angeles Coliseum, Darlington, Bristol, Dover, Fontana, Martinsville, and pretty much any dirt track in America. Secondly, all of the tracks must either be ready for racing at this very moment or need some very light renovations. By that, I mean renovations that would take less than a year to do. You know, things like a quick repave, planting grass, adding seats, etc. Third, in the interest of not stretching ourselves too thin, so to speak, we aren't leaving the North American continent for the time being. So tracks that would be missing out on potential dates include Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Twin Ring Motegi, Fuji Speedway, Surfers Paradise, Assen, Zolder, Brands Hatch, Silverstone, and the Lausitz Ring. And those are just the tracks we raced on during the split. There are tons of tracks around the world that I would love to race on that I didn't mention there. It's an idea that I would love to revisit once we get to a more successful spot domestically, but for now, it would be in our best interest to hold off on it. If we haven't fully captured the American market, it wouldn't be the wisest of decisions to be branching out intercontinentally quite yet, now would it? Now without further ado, let's start my version of the 2024 NTT IndyCar Series schedule. This, as you see here, is our month-by-month schedule for the 2024 calendar year. Through January and February, there isn't much to report. Midway through February, we hold our preseason tests, a road course test at Sebring and an oval test at Texas Motor Speedway. We begin our season on March 10th, running through the streets of St. Petersburg. This is how we should always start our season. It's how it's been for a very long time, and I don't see a reason why that should change. After taking a week off so that prospective drivers can participate in the 12 hours of Sebring if they so desire, we go 4 hours south to our first oval race of the year, a 300-mile race at Homestead Miami Speedway. This is the beginning of a policy of oval racing expansion. Homestead has had a history of good races in the late split and early reunification days, so why not make our grand return for the first time since 2011? After the move south, we begin making our way north towards Indy with round 3 at Charlotte. Instead of using the oval, though, we use the infield road course. It'd be an interesting experiment for sure. Joseph Newgarden took some laps over Roval weekend for NASCAR in 2019, and the car took to the track pretty well, although there was only one of them, so who knows what the actual racing product would look like. The next week after that, we go to Richmond. IndyCar already had plans of racing at Richmond in 2020, but then, 2020 happened. Consider this the very delayed fulfillment of a previous agreement. IndyCar could use more Iowa-sized tracks. American motorsports already has a short track problem. More short tracks are good for a healthy diet of racing. Then, over the next week and a half, we have 2 races in the Nashville area. Some say that in the age of the Nashville Street Course, using the Nashville Superspeedway in Lebanon is a non-option. It's obsolete. And to that, my rebuttal is, ¿Por qué no los dos? On Saturday, April 13th, we race around the streets of downtown Nashville. Then, on Wednesday night, April 17th, we race in Lebanon at Nashville Superspeedway. Wednesday night racing went over well enough for NASCAR during the pandemic, so trying it for ourselves sounds like a good idea on paper. Next week, we mark racing's triumphant return to Kentucky Speedway. If I can be honest with you, we're going here purely for sentimental reasons. I love this track, and although it wholeheartedly sucked for NASCAR, IndyCar's product there wasn't half bad. The asphalt's kinda weathered from just sitting there without any racing on it, so it would need a quick layer of it to make it racing worthy. It would also need new grass, and we would have to move all of the chipless Ford trucks that are still sitting in the parking lot. It sounds like a lot, but if they started work like within a week of me recording this and the weather cooperated, then we would have plenty of time for testing before race weekend. Then, on Arbor Day weekend, we have our biggest risk yet. We return to Indianapolis Raceway Park for the first time since the USAC days. Now, I had formulated the idea of going to IRP, forgetting that the road course had been in a state of disrepair since the mid-2000s. The only things on the premises right now are the drag strip and the 3/5 of a mile short track, which is already used for the USF 2000 series. No road course would obviously be a massive obstacle, but I would be a liar to say that would stop me. I introduce to you the Brownsburg 250, 250 laps around the bull ring at IRP. Essentially, this is a stopgap race so that the track's owners can get the assets and funding necessary to either repave the old road course or pave a new one on the premises. This could either be the best thing ever or the worst thing ever, and the only way we can figure that out is to just do it. Now, we're still going to IRP with the idea of eventually racing on the road course, so unless the bull ring race is a smash hit, both commercially and in TV ratings, then we're going to be on the road course by, at the earliest, 2026. And now, we're at the month of May. We hold the Indy GP a week earlier than usual on the 5th to give the full-time team some more rest before the first practice for the 500 is held on May 14th. Fast Fridays on the 17th, pole day and bump day are on the 18th and 19th, carb day on the 24th, and the greatest spectacle in racing on Memorial Day weekend is held on May 26th. The Indy 500 is one of 3 double points races on the year, acting as the first leg of the revival of the Indy Triple Crown. 3 500-mile races where if a driver wins all 3, then he or she wins a $5 million paycheck. We'll get to the other 2 races when we get there. Now, we would take off a week immediately after the 500 to cool things down, but that break had to be postponed to schedule everything around the 24 Hours of Le Mans in mid-June, in case anyone wants to race in that. So, the week after the 500, we're right back at it, under the lights at Chicagoland. Not only is this a sentimental thing, but also IndyCar has an amazing history at Chicagoland. Not only were the stands filled on a regular basis, but the racing there was so goddamn fun to watch. To put it into perspective, 3 of the top 5 closest finishes in IndyCar history all happened at Chicagoland. You can watch all of those races in full on YouTube, and they're all instant classics, not just ending merchants. In my mind, we should continue to forge a great legacy of racing at this track like we never even left. I originally thought that the track needed a repave, but the pictures from the motocross event held there last year showed that the track's asphalt is still in good enough condition to race on. It feels like a miracle considering how long this lot has just been sitting there doing nothing. New grass is a must though, it all looks dead. Then the week after that, we get race number 2 of the Triple Crown, the Irish Hills 500 at Michigan. I've always liked this track, and it has history. This is where CART tried to set up their competitor to the Indy 500 in the early days of the split, so why not return it to a prime slot on the calendar? Alongside its history, I had this idea of turning this race into our version of NASCAR's Southern 500 at Darlington. Michigan will be our throwback weekend. There are so many ideas for one-off paint schemes that if I were to stand here and name all of them off of the top of my head, we'd be here for the next half hour. After a week off for Le Mans, we have the Detroit Street Race on Saturday the 22nd. My idea for this weekend is alternating between tracks. On even-numbered years, we go to the streets of Detroit. On odd-number years, we return to the track on Belle Isle. Sorta how the F1 German Grand Prix used to work between the Hockenheim Ring and the Nürburgring. Round number 14 is held at Road America. There isn't really anything to say here. Road America has produced consistently good racing. Moving on, our halfway point of the year falls on July 7th, a 300-mile event at Iowa. Again, it's a track that's already on the schedule that produces good racing. Why wouldn't it be here? It's not the doubleheader that it usually is, since I'm not exactly the highest on the concept of a doubleheader, but if the demand is there, then my hands are tied. We can do a doubleheader that weekend. It's the only one I'm doing, though. You can't talk me into another one. After taking a week off at the midway point, we're back at it again at Mid-Ohio. Mid-Ohio is in the same boat as Road America. The track is good, so we race at the track that is good. Next week after that is IndyCar's return to the Milwaukee Mile for the Wisconsin 300. We're already coming back there in real life, so the higher-ups in IndyCar see upside in this place with the current car. Not only that, but the track has a rich history in open-wheel racing. It would be foolish not to follow through with what was already agreed. On Saturday, August 3rd, we take the circus to Watkins Glen. It's a track that's world famous. NASCAR has had many a classic race there, and even Formula One has held races here in the past. The last time we went here, it wasn't necessarily attended well, but that can be arranged. The racing wasn't exactly terrible, so giving it another shot wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea. Now that we're getting into the fall, we're going to start holding more and more races on Saturdays to give us more time to work with if rain occurs, and more importantly, to avoid conflicting with the all-powerful NFL. IndyCar's current staff of executives axed the Texas race because all the dates that TMS's management offered would end in them competing with the NFL in ratings in their eyes. I, on the other hand, realized that competing with football is A, a fruitless endeavor, and B, entirely avoidable. Seriously, at this point, the only thing that we even can think of competing with or beating Football Night in America in TV ratings is the resignation of the president, and even then that's a maybe. Instead of just throwing ourselves headlong into Sunday afternoons and evenings, kneecapping our viewership in the process, we race on Saturdays to fit into the NFL's dead air. After Watkins Glen, we end our Triple Crown with 500 miles at Pocono. Admittedly, it's a risk, considering how recent the death of Justin Wilson and the Robert Wickens crash were, but the cars have gotten much safer since then, with aero screens to protect the driver's head, a new packless aero package, and cars that aren't as fast, although it is close. Pocono just has too much history in this sport to just throw away like that, in my opinion, so we make our return. Next week is the return to night racing at Gateway. Again, consistency is the name of the game. Gateway is a good track for IndyCar. There's a reason we gave it its big break in major racing. One thing I would change, though, is returning it to the nighttime slot that it had in the late DW12 days. I always thought the track looked great under the lights, and it was a crime to turn it into an afternoon race. After another off week, we begin the quick scramble west with a Saturday afternoon race at Kansas Speedway. Kansas is a name I've seen thrown around in conversations on where to take IndyCar in the future. It's another track that has a history of creating an electric racing product, much like Chicagoland. Maybe this could be a Saturday night race as well, or at the very least a transitioning race, starting in the daylight and ending at night. Our second Wednesday race could be held at Barber Motorsports Park in Alabama. Considering its geographical location, it could either be an early season race after Homestead or right here in the home stretch. Maybe in 2025 it'll end up being the third race of the year. I've always liked the idea of having at least one race that revolves around the schedule. It's something that isn't done too often. We spend the next week, Sunday to Saturday, in Texas. First, on the 15th, we run the second race in IndyCar history at the Circuit of the Americas. It was an interesting experiment that, in my opinion, paid off back in 2019. The crowd looked good and the racing was fun too. It was kind of disappointing that it was only raced once. On the following Saturday, we hold the Bombardier Learjet 500K at Texas Motor Speedway. As I said earlier, I found a workaround of sorts to quell the football problem, and the racing there has been dynamite for a very long time. Who could forget classic races as early as 2002 and as recent as last season? It feels like a crime not to be racing at Texas. The final true off week of the year is followed by the only international race of the year, the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico City. We're not just trying to recapture the United States, we're trying to get the entire North American continent. I know this decision would make a couple of my friends very happy. Phoenix and Portland are next after that, followed by Sonoma. A lot of fans have said that the racing at Sonoma was kinda subpar, but there's more than one layout that we can use. Perhaps using the chute, or the NASCAR layout, would make it marginally better to watch. After Sonoma, we stay in the Bay Area, with the penultimate race at Laguna Seca. This track is just great. There have been many a classic race there, and I don't see why we should ever move away from that. I would have ended the season here, but there is one other track in California that is even more lucrative. Perhaps a good consolation prize is ending the Indy Lights season here. Finally, we end the season racing around the streets of Long Beach. Where better to end our season than in the massive market of Los Angeles, California? We should continue to get big crowds for the event as we have for decades beforehand. It makes the most geographical sense to end the season here since it's about as far west as we've ever gotten. And so, that ends how I would set up the IndyCar schedule for the 2024 season. Now here is where the video should end. I was always taught by my parents to plan ahead in case something goes sideways. As such, I've created a list of tracks that I would essentially keep on speed dial in case a track ends up underperforming on the actual schedule. Introducing the backup plan. Let's start with the ovals. One of the people I discussed this with argued for a date at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. I could see where he was coming from, but I decided against it because the last race there in 2011 was bad. I know most of that was because of the rain and Brian Barnhart being smooth-brained, but I decided to be cautious and put it on the backup plan list. Charlotte's Oval is a long shot since I'm banking on the Roval being a success. If it does end up failing, then Charlotte's Oval is the number one option to replace it. Pikes Peak International Raceway in Colorado would be one of the easier tracks to get a date on in theory since it's not owned by SMI or NASCAR. I feel like the owners that they have now would love the revenue that comes with a big-time Indy date. Sometimes I worry that track can't sustain itself on the yearly time attack alone. And lastly, for the ovals, we come back to Nazareth Speedway. Nazareth is currently returning to the earth in a field that is currently being developed for a guitar manufacturing warehouse. It breaks my heart, but there is hope. If NASCAR can get North Wilkesboro back out of its funk, we can do the same for Nazareth. Let's make a massive push to return this track to the schedule soon. Cut down the shrubs, put the walls back up, scan it for iRacing, do whatever. Now, on to the road courses and street courses. The number one option overall, regardless of track orientation, is the Cleveland Burke Lakefront Airport. My dad argued for this himself as he really liked the track, but I didn't see much in the idea. But then I watched those kart races from the 90s back for the first time in years and thought to myself, well, that was a mistake. Those races were great, and if a track starts to disappoint, then it will be first in line for a race. The Thermal Club in Coachella Valley is currently on the schedule in real life for a non-points race. It's not exactly an idea that I'm averse to. Perhaps in one of the break weeks, like the one between Gateway and Kansas, we can slot it in as an invitational all-star race. Not a points race, never a points race, but still on the schedule nonetheless. NOLA Motorsports Park in New Orleans is on the docket since we've been there before, and 2 of the 3 USF 2000 series are going there next year, so it's being used for things. If a race early in the season when we're down south begins to disappoint, then this will take a spot on the lineup. If the Texas market makes us enough money, then Houston Street Course is enough for consideration. For this, I'm going to quickly steal Slapshoe's idea of the Texas Triple Crown that he went over in his NASCAR video from 2020, but I'm renaming it the Texas Trinity because we already have a Triple Crown. The Triple Crown. 3 straight races at COTA, TMS, and Reliant Park. If you win all 3, you get a big payday. Simple as. Sebring International Raceway is where we do our preseason testing, and the Road to Indy ladder races there already, so that's on the board for an early season slot. I had the idea of holding a race there on the Wednesday after the 12-hour endurance race. I mean, the drivers would already be down there, so why not? Virginia International Raceway is a bit long for a race in its full course configuration, but the North Course is just perfect. Again, you also have the Road to Indy ladder there, so there's that too. And finally, a lot of you are probably wondering what happened to our race in Canada. To be honest with you, I forgot. I find the racing at Exhibition Place so uninspiring that the idea that we raced there completely slipped my mind until the schedule was too long and filled with tracks that I actually like. If I were to hold a race in Canada, I would really want to hold it on a purpose-built racetrack and not a street circuit. From my way of thinking, if I'm going to spend that much money to close off public roads in a big city to hold a race, I would need that race to be an absolute banger to make it worth the time and money spent. Unfortunately, those races are few and far between in Indy history. Hell, they're even few and far between Formula 1 standards, and they've been racing on street courses forever. The leading candidate for a race in the true north is the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal. Formula 1 holds constantly good races for Formula 1 standards, and NASCAR's races in the Xfinity Series were chaotic messes that were just a joy to watch. IndyCar should really be thinking about creating its own history there. The second option is Canadian Tire Motorsports Park in Bowmanville, an hour and a half out of Toronto. Despite taking Toronto off the schedule, I still think it's a market worth catering to, and now that the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series doesn't race there anymore, we would be the biggest attraction in town. The third option is one that the average fan wouldn't expect, the Circuit Mont-Tremblant in Mont-Tremblant, Quebec. Champ Car held a race there in 2007 that wasn't half bad, and it really deserves more than one showing. Of course, if worse comes to worse, then the street circuits are still an option. Exhibition Place, Concord Pacific Place in Vancouver, and Edmonton Airport are still prime spots for an auto race, as much as I really don't want to do that. And that, my friends, is how I would set up the schedule, but that is not the end of this little mini-series. In the coming weeks, I'll be covering something else, from promotional tactics and presentation, to what I would do with the Road to Indy ladder, to miscellaneous stuff like gaming licenses. Thank you for watching.